You dare to suggest that humans are capable warriors? Supreme Warlord Cathax's crystalline mandibles clicked in what passed for laughter among the Arcsidians. Your species barely managed spaceflight a century ago. We were conquering solar systems when your ancestors were crafting crude tools from bronze. Jessica Chen, first-year cadet at the Terran Defense Academy, maintained her parade rest stance and kept her expression neutral. Inside, however, she was counting backwards from 10, a technique her anger management counselor had strongly recommended after the incident with the Academy's combat simulator. With all due respect, Supreme Warlord, she replied, choosing her words carefully. I simply stated that the human martial arts demonstration scheduled for today's cultural exchange would be worth your time to observe. The massive arthropoid shifted his iridescent carapace, sending rainbow patterns dancing across the embassy's vaulted ceiling. The effect would have been beautiful if he wasn't simultaneously looking at her like she was something stuck to the bottom of one of his 4 primary appendages. I have observed 10,000 combat forms across 800 species, Cathax declared. I have personally defeated champions from every major spacefaring race in the Galactic Confederation. Your species... He paused, mandibles twitching in what Jessica had come to recognize as the Arcsidian equivalent of a condescending smirk. Your species is soft, fragile. You lack natural weapons, your endurance is unremarkable, and your strength-to-mass ratio is frankly embarrassing. Jessica felt her eye twitch. 9, 8, 7. Perhaps, Cathax continued, clearly warming to his subject, you would care to demonstrate these supposedly impressive combat capabilities yourself? I would be happy to provide a practical demonstration of why the Arcsidian Empire has remained undefeated for 30,000 years. 6, 5, 4. Screw it. You're challenging me to a duel? Jessica asked, allowing herself a small smile. Are you sure that's wise, Supreme Warlord? The Cultural Exchange Agreement specifically prohibits any actions that might trigger an interstellar diplomatic incident. Cathax's secondary antennae vibrated with amusement. I will submit a formal waiver to the Confederation Council, taking full responsibility for any unfortunate outcomes. Unless, of course, you wish to withdraw your claims about human martial prowess? Jessica's smile widened ever so slightly. Oh no, sir. I accept your challenge. Though perhaps we should establish some ground rules. To protect you, of course. The assembled diplomatic staff, both human and alien, shifted uncomfortably. Several of the more experienced negotiators began slowly backing toward the exits. Protect me? Cathax's mandibles clacked rapidly. Your concern is noted but unnecessary, young one. I will, of course, restrain myself to non-lethal combat techniques. How thoughtful, Jessica replied. In that case, shall we say, hand-to-hand only, no weapons or tech augments, victory by submission or incapacitation. Agreed. Cathax's crystalline exoskeleton rippled with patterns of aggressive crimson. Though I must warn you, even without weapons, I am capable of generating sufficient force to crack titanium alloy. Fascinating, Jessica said, already removing her uniform jacket and laying it carefully across a nearby chair. I don't suppose you've ever heard of something called Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu? Some primitive human combat form? Cathax's mandibles clicked dismissively. I think I'll manage. 20 minutes later, a very different conversation was taking place in the embassy's medical bay. How? Cathax demanded from where he lay immobilized on the examination table, 3 of his 4 primary arms in temporary splints. How did you... What manner of dark sorcery? Leverage, Jessica replied cheerfully, holding an ice pack to her bruised ribs, plus a solid understanding of arthropod joint structures and stress points. Oh, and about 15 years of competitive martial arts training. Did you know humans started developing ways to fight bigger, stronger opponents pretty much as soon as we figured out walking upright? We're kind of specialists at it. But I am Supreme Warlord Cathax, undefeated champion of the Arcsidian Empire, terror of the Crab Nebula. And I'm a first-year cadet who keeps getting written up for being unnecessarily aggressive in training exercises. Jessica shrugged, then winced slightly. Maybe you should have asked about that before challenging me to a fight. This is impossible, Cathax muttered. The strength differential alone. Yeah, about that. Jessica leaned forward conspiratorially. Fun fact about humans. We actually evolved as persistence hunters. We're not the strongest or fastest, but we're really good at analyzing movement patterns and finding weak points. Also, thanks to our unique shoulder structure, we can throw things more accurately than pretty much any other species in known space. Though I guess that last bit wasn't really relevant today. The Council will hear of this outrage, Krathos declared, though with notably less vigor than his earlier pronouncements. Oh, they already have. Jessica gestured to the corner of the room, where a small drone had been quietly recording the entire encounter. Standard diplomatic protocol. All formal challenges have to be documented. I'm pretty sure the footage is being distributed to every major species in the Confederation right now. Krathos's carapace turned a sickly shade of green. But look on the bright side, Jessica continued. You've just made history as the first Supreme Warlord to formally acknowledge humans as capable warriors. That's got to count for something, right? I did no such thing. Actually, sir, you kind of did. The standard submission hold acknowledgement is considered a binding statement under Confederation law. It's right there in the Cultural Exchange Agreement you signed. Section 47, paragraph 12, subsection C. You know, the one about formal recognition of martial prowess? The medical bay's monitoring equipment registered a sharp spike in Krathos's blood pressure. You planned this, he accused. This entire sequence of events. Me? Plan something like this? Jessica's expression was the very picture of innocence. Sir, I'm just a simple first-year cadet. Although, now that you mention it, I did write my thesis on psychological warfare and diplomatic manipulation in multi-species conflicts. My advisors seemed to think I had a natural talent for it. Krathos was silent for a long moment. Perhaps, he finally said, mandibles moving slowly, we should discuss revising certain aspects of the Arcsidian Empire's diplomatic stance toward humanity. What a wonderful suggestion, Supreme Warlord. I'm sure the Confederation Council would be happy to schedule an emergency session. You know, once you're back on your feet. All four of them. As she left the medical bay, Jessica could have sworn she heard one of the alien medical technicians trying to stifle a laugh. She allowed herself a small grin. Not bad for a first-year cadet's practical diplomacy exercise. The next day, the Terran Defense Academy's combat training curriculum was substantially revised to include a new required course. Applied Diplomatic Resolution through Controlled Violence 101. Jessica Chen was listed as a teaching assistant. In an entirely unrelated development, the Arcsidian Empire formally requested to open trade negotiations with Earth, with a particular interest in cultural exchange programs focused on martial arts instruction. Supreme Warlord Krathos was conspicuously absent from the delegation. Some said he had taken an extended leave of absence to study primitive combat forms. Others suggested he was simply trying to avoid the increasingly popular video footage of his defeat, which had somehow been set to classical Earth music and was rapidly becoming a viral sensation across the galactic information networks. The official statement from the Arcsidian Embassy claimed he was pursuing advanced diplomatic training. When pressed for details, they declined to comment on why this training seemed to involve frequent visits to a small Brazilian jiu-jitsu academy in Sao Paulo. Jessica, for her part, received both a commendation for advancing human-alien relations and a formal reprimand for unnecessarily escalating a diplomatic situation. She framed them side by side in her dormitory room, right next to her new certification as an honorary instructor of interspecies combat techniques. When asked about the incident years later, she would only smile and say, "Sometimes the best way to achieve peace is to be really, really good at violence, but only use it when absolutely necessary. Also, always read the fine print in diplomatic agreements. You never know when you might need to legally judo throw a galactic warlord." The story became required reading at both the Terran Defense Academy and the Confederation Diplomatic Corps. It was generally filed under How Not to Underestimate Humans and Why You Should Always Check Your Opponent's Combat Record. Krathos eventually did return to his duties as Supreme Warlord, sporting a new black belt and a decidedly more respectful attitude toward primitive species. He was also rumored to have instituted mandatory grappling training for all Arcsidian military officers, though he refused to discuss his reasons for this policy change. The only comment he would make on the subject was a cryptic warning to his subordinates. Never challenge a human to single combat unless you are absolutely certain they aren't smiling about it. Words that would go down in galactic history as some of the wisest ever spoken by an Arcsidian Supreme Warlord. "Is it true you made Supreme Warlord Krathos tap out using a triangle choke?" asked the wide-eyed Centaurian cadet. Jessica Chen, now in her final year at the Terran Defense Academy, suppressed a sigh. 3 years had passed since the incident, and she still couldn't get through a single interspecies combat theory class without someone bringing it up. That's actually a common misconception. she replied, adjusting her instructor's uniform. It was an omoplata. The Supreme Warlord's unique joint structure made traditional chokes less effective. Now if we could focus on today's lesson. But what about the rumor that he's been secretly training human martial arts masters? Interrupted another student. This one a floating crystalline entity from the Rigel system. They say he's built an entire dojo in his personal quarters. I wouldn't know anything about that, Jessica said diplomatically, though she had to bite back a smile. Her most recent intelligence briefing had included surveillance photos of what appeared to be a full-sized BJJ training facility being installed in the Arxidian Imperial Palace. However, I would encourage you all to remember that the purpose of this class is not to discuss past encounters, but to understand the principles of effective cross-species combat techniques. A tentative appendage raised from the back of the room. Speaking of principles, is it accurate that you deliberately provoked the Supreme Warlord into challenging you? Jessica's expression remained carefully neutral. That would be a gross oversimplification of a complex diplomatic situation. She paused for effect. I merely created an environment in which certain predictable behaviors could manifest themselves in a controlled setting. You mean you played him like a quantum fiddle? Came a drawling voice from the doorway. Jessica turned to find Admiral Sarah Martinez, her former combat instructor, and current head of Terran Special Operations, leaning against the frame with an amused expression. Admiral! Jessica snapped to attention, her students quickly following suit, those with suitable anatomical structures anyway. At ease, everyone, Martinez waved off the formalities. I'm just here to borrow Instructor Chen for a moment. Something's come up that requires her particular skill set. Jessica raised an eyebrow. The Admiral didn't usually make personal appearances unless something had gone seriously sideways at the diplomatic level. Class dismissed, Jessica announced. Please review chapters 7 through 9 on leverage points in variable gravity environments for next session. As the diverse collection of cadets filed out, some walking, some floating, and one rolling like a sophisticated geometric shape, Martinez closed the door and activated the room's privacy field. We have a situation, the Admiral said without preamble. Krathos is back. Jessica blinked. I thought he was still on his extended diplomatic training mission in Brazil. He was, until about 6 hours ago, when he formally challenged the Drachnid Imperium's high commander to ritual combat. He did. What? Jessica felt a headache coming on. Please tell me this isn't because of— Oh, it gets better, Martinez interrupted, her expression caught between amusement and concern. He challenged them using modified human combat rules, and he specifically requested you as his technical advisor. Jessica closed her eyes and counted to 10. It didn't help. Admiral, when I demonstrated that humans could hold their own in personal combat, the goal was to prevent interstellar conflicts, not inspire them. Technically, you demonstrated that humans could systematically manipulate overconfident alien warlords into embarrassing themselves in legally binding ways, Martinez corrected, which is exactly why you're perfect for this situation. The Drachnids are 3 times the size of Arxidians, Jessica pointed out, and they have natural plasma generation capabilities, which is prohibited under the standard ritual combat protocols that Krathos specified in his challenge. Martinez's grin widened. Protocols that look suspiciously similar to certain Earth-originated martial arts tournament rules. Jessica groaned. He's been planning this. Obviously. The question is, what are you going to do about it? Me? I'm just a combat instructor now. Surely this is a matter for the diplomatic corps? Martinez's expression turned serious. The Drachnids have been pushing boundaries for months, testing defenses, making veiled threats. If they accept Krathos's challenge and win, it could destabilize the entire sector. The Arxidian Empire would be humiliated, the power balance would shift dramatically, and Earth would be caught in the middle. And if they refuse the challenge, they lose face in front of the Confederation Council. Krathos has managed to put them in a very interesting position. Martinez paused. Almost as interesting as the position you put him in 3 years ago. Jessica's eyes narrowed. You think he's using my playbook? I think he spent 3 years studying not just human martial arts, but human strategy. And now he's trying to pull off something you might call— what was that phrase from your thesis? Psychological warfare through controlled escalation? That's not exactly— The transport leaves in 2 hours, Martinez continued smoothly. Try to pack light. Oh, and Chen? Yes, Admiral. If you somehow manage to prevent an interstellar war and advance human diplomatic interests in the process, well, There might be a position opening up in the Special Operations Strategic Planning Division. Jessica allowed herself a small smile. Would this position happen to involve teaching overconfident aliens painful lessons about underestimating humans? That would be classified information, Instructor Chen. Martinez returned the smile. But I will say that your previous experience seems relevant. 2 days later, in the Confederation Council's ceremonial combat arena, Supreme Warlord Krathos stood calmly in his corner, wearing what appeared to be a custom-made gi adapted for his unique physiology. In the opposite corner, the Drachnid High Commander loomed like a living mountain of scales and barely contained plasma energy. And in Krathos' corner, performing final equipment checks with practiced efficiency, Jessica Chen wondered exactly when her life had become quite this complicated. "Remember," she muttered, adjusting Krathos' belt. "Stick to the plan. No improvising." "Of course not," Krathos replied, his mandibles clicking in what she now recognized as suppressed amusement. "I learned from the best, after all." "That's what worries me," Jessica sighed. Then she noticed something about the GI's weave pattern. "Wait a minute. Is this rated for high-temperature resistance?" As I said, Krathos' crystalline carapace rippled with what might have been satisfaction. "I learned from the best." The signal for the match's start echoed through the arena. As Krathos moved forward with the precise footwork of a trained grappler, Jessica had a sudden suspicion about exactly what sort of diplomatic training he'd been pursuing for the past 3 years. She also had a feeling her life was about to get even more complicated. At least it wouldn't be boring. The Confederation Council's ceremonial combat arena had hosted thousands of ritual battles over its long history. None quite like this. Supreme Warlord Krathos, resplendent in his temperature-resistant GI, moved with the practiced grace of a dedicated martial artist. The Drachnid High Commander, nearly twice his size, radiating waves of plasma energy that made the air shimmer, looked distinctly unsettled by his opponent's calm approach. "You're sure about this?" Jessica murmured into her comm unit, watching from Krathos' corner. "Absolutely," came Admiral Martinez's reply from the diplomatic observation box. "Our analysis suggests the Drachnids have been waiting for an excuse to launch a military campaign. Krathos' challenge forced them to either accept a controlled confrontation or lose face. Either way, it prevents immediate large-scale conflict. Unless they decide to ignore the ritual combat protocols entirely," Jessica pointed out. "That's why we have 3 battle fleets on standby just outside the system. But let's hope it doesn't come to that. Focus on your part of the plan." Jessica watched as Krathos smoothly evaded the High Commander's first rush, using a basic redirection technique that she recognized from fundamental BJJ training. The Drachnid's momentum carried him past his smaller opponent, plasma corona flaring in frustration. "Interesting choice of tactics, Supreme Warlord," the High Commander rumbled, his scales shifting like tectonic plates as he turned. "I had heard you'd taken up primitive combat studies, but I didn't expect you to rely on them exclusively." "Perhaps," Krathos replied, maintaining perfect defensive positioning. "You should consider why a Supreme Warlord with 30,000 years of combat experience would choose to study primitive techniques." The High Commander's only response was another charge, this one accompanied by a deliberate pulse of plasma energy that skirted the edge of what was permitted under the ritual combat rules. Krathos didn't just evade. He used the aggressive movement against his opponent, adding his own timing to the Drachnid's momentum in a textbook foot sweep. The sound of a being that size hitting the arena floor was impressive. The look of shock on the High Commander's face was priceless. "You see," Krathos continued conversationally, circling his opponent with measured steps, "I learned something fascinating during my studies on Earth. Humans developed their martial arts specifically to allow physically weaker opponents to defeat stronger ones. They spent thousands of years perfecting the principles of leverage, timing, and strategic thinking." The High Commander surged to his feet, plasma corona intensifying. "You dare to suggest—" "I suggest nothing," Krathos interrupted. "I merely share an observation. Sometimes the most effective techniques are the ones your opponent dismisses as primitive." What followed was either a masterclass in strategic grappling or a demonstration of advanced physics, depending on your perspective. Krathos moved like water around his larger opponent's attacks, never meeting force with force, always redirecting and using the High Commander's own energy against him. Jessica found herself taking mental notes. Krathos had clearly been paying attention during his diplomatic training. "This is impossible," the High Commander growled after his 4th failed attempt to grab his seemingly untouchable opponent. "You cannot defeat me with these simple techniques." "Simple?" Krathos' mandibles clicked in what Jessica now recognized as genuine amusement. These techniques took me 3 years to begin to master. I suffered more training injuries than in all my previous combat experience combined. Do you know why I persisted? The High Commander responded with another plasma-enhanced charge. Krathos moved with perfect timing, securing an underhook and using the Drachnid's forward momentum to initiate a throw that would have made Jessica's first judo instructor weep with joy. Because, Krathos continued as his opponent crashed to the ground again, I learned that true strength comes not from raw power, but from understanding how to use it efficiently. He secured a joint lock that somehow worked despite the High Commander's alien anatomy. Would you like me to demonstrate further? Or shall we discuss the terms of the Drachnid Imperium's withdrawal from the contested border systems? The High Commander's plasma corona flickered. You planned this entire sequence of events. Actually, Krathos admitted, maintaining the lock with technical precision. I borrowed the strategy from someone else. A rather innovative young human who once taught me a valuable lesson about underestimating supposedly primitive species. In her corner, Jessica fought to maintain a professional expression. In the diplomatic box, she could have sworn she heard Admiral Martinez chuckling. The Imperium will not forget this insult, the High Commander declared, though his tone lacked conviction. Not an insult, Krathos corrected. An invitation. My training facility on Arxidian Prime has excellent instructors. I would be happy to arrange an exchange program. After all, is it not better to learn from each other than to fight needlessly? There was a long moment of silence, broken only by the subtle crackle of plasma energy and the soft sound of breathing from the assembled diplomatic corps. Finally, the High Commander's corona dimmed slightly. Perhaps there is wisdom in your words, Supreme Warlord. Excellent! Krathos released the joint lock with practiced care. I believe the humans have a tradition called a post-training meal, where participants discuss technique and strategy. Shall we continue our diplomatic negotiations in that format? As the two former combatants left the arena together, already deep in discussion about leverage points and energy redistribution, Jessica felt a hand on her shoulder. Well done, Chen, Admiral Martinez said quietly. Though I'm curious, did you know he was going to adapt your original strategy to this degree? Jessica watched as Krathos demonstrated a particular wrist lock to an increasingly interested High Commander. Admiral, I think we've all learned not to underestimate anyone's capacity for learning and adaptation. Speaking of learning, Martinez smiled. How do you feel about teaching a new course at the Academy? Working title? Advanced Diplomatic Resolution through Applied Combat Philosophy. Let me guess, Jessica sighed. Joint program with the Arxidian Empire and the Drachnid Imperium? Krathos was quite insistent, something about honoring the traditions of our instructors. Jessica watched as a group of Drachnid officers cautiously approached Krathos to ask about his training methods. You know, Admiral, I'm starting to think we might need to update the old saying. Oh? It's not just that humans are surprisingly good at violence. We're surprisingly good at teaching others to be good at violence in very specific, controlled, diplomatically useful ways. Martinez laughed. I'll make sure that gets included in the course description. Now about that position in Special Operations. 3 months later, the first joint human Arxidian Drachnid Martial Arts Academy opened its doors. They had to reinforce the training mats to handle plasma energy and crystalline exoskeletons, but the principles remained the same. The first lesson, taught personally by senior instructor Chen and guest lecturer Supreme Warlord Krathos, was titled, Why Underestimating Primitive Techniques is Your First and Last Mistake. It became the most popular course in Confederation space, even if some students did complain about the homework involving leverage calculations for species with non-standard joint configurations. And that, honored delegates, Jessica Chen concluded, addressing the Confederation Council's annual security summit, is why the Joint Combat Diplomacy Initiative has proven so successful in reducing interstellar tensions over the past year. The assembled representatives, representing over 300 spacefaring species, studied the holographic statistics floating above the presentation podium. The numbers were impressive. A 47% reduction in border disputes, a 63% decrease in ritual combat challenges, and perhaps most surprisingly, a 158% increase in cross-species cultural exchange programs. Most illuminating Special Operations Director Chen, the Arcturian Prime Minister's crystalline form chimed melodiously. Though I must inquire, was it truly necessary to include actual combat training in the diplomatic curriculum? An excellent question, came a familiar clicking voice from the delegation floor. Supreme Warlord Krathos rose, his ceremonial armor now adorned with both traditional Arxidian battle honors and what appeared to be a collection of martial arts championship medals. Perhaps a practical demonstration would be instructive? Jessica maintained her professional demeanor, but internally she was counting backwards from 10. Some habits never changed. While I appreciate the offer, Supreme Warlord, she replied smoothly, I believe we've evolved beyond the need for impromptu demonstrations. She paused for effect. After all, the security footage from last month's informal discussion with the Proxima Centauri pirates has been quite educational for everyone. Several delegates shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The footage in question, showing a joint team of human, Arxidian, and Drachnid peacekeepers using modified Brazilian jiu-jitsu techniques to subdue a group of spatial pirates, had become something of a viral sensation across the galactic information networks. Indeed, rumbled High Commander Vexthor of the Drachnid Imperium, his plasma corona pulsing with what might have been amusement, though I still maintain that the omoplata was unnecessary. The omoplata is never unnecessary, Cathax responded with the air of someone continuing a long-running friendly debate, as my esteemed first instructor demonstrated years ago. Jessica cleared her throat. If we could return to the matter at hand. Actually, interrupted a new voice, I believe this discussion reveals exactly why the program has been so successful. Admiral Martinez stepped onto the presentation platform, her dress uniform adorned with the new insignia of the Interstellar Strategic Operations Command. Please elaborate, the council chair requested. Consider what we're witnessing, Martinez gestured to Cathax and Vexthor. Former adversaries, now engaged in friendly technical debates about joint manipulation techniques. They've found common ground through shared experience and mutual respect. More importantly, they've internalized one of humanity's most important lessons. Which is? The Arcturian Prime Minister chimed. That controlled opposition is better than unrestricted conflict, Jessica answered. That there's value in understanding how to fight without destroying, how to compete without conquering, and how to turn potential enemies into training partners. An enlightened perspective, Cathax agreed. Though I must point out that some of us learned this lesson rather forcefully. You're never going to let me forget that first match, are you? Jessica asked. It has been immortalized in the Imperial Archives as the Day of Enlightened Humbling. Cathax's mandibles clicked in amusement. I believe it's required viewing for all Arxidian military officers now. Along with the follow-up documentary, From Combat to Cooperation, the Cathax Chen Doctrine, Vexthor added. It's become quite popular in Drachnid diplomatic training programs. Jessica resisted the urge to rest her forehead on the podium. Instead, she pulled up the next set of holographic projections. Moving on to our proposals for the coming year, she continued professionally. We've identified several opportunities to expand the program's scope. The presentation continued, but there was a noticeable shift in the council chamber's atmosphere. Representatives who had entered with skepticism were now leaning forward with interest. Species that had historically been hostile to one another were exchanging thoughtful glances. And in the diplomatic observation gallery, a group of junior ambassadors from various worlds could be heard quietly discussing the possibility of joint training sessions. Later, in the council's private reception area, Admiral Martinez found Jessica staring out at the stars through the station's panoramic windows. Quite a success, Martinez commented. Though I noticed you didn't mention the new training facility being constructed on Mars. Some things are better revealed gradually, Jessica replied, especially when they involve reinforced training mats capable of withstanding plasma discharge and crystalline impact forces. Speaking of impacts, Martinez smiled. Have you seen the latest enrollment numbers for the Academy's diplomatic combat program? Let me guess. Another record-breaking year? Better. We're getting applications from species that historically refuse to participate in any form of joint military training. Apparently, the prospect of learning mysterious human combat techniques is too intriguing to resist. Jessica shook her head. You realize this isn't exactly what I had in mind when I wrote that thesis on psychological warfare and diplomatic manipulation? No, Martinez agreed. It's better. You've helped create something that's actually bringing species together instead of driving them apart. Even if it did start with you throwing a supreme warlord across a room. Technical point. It was more of a sweep than a throw. And now look at him. Martinez gestured to where Cathax was earnestly demonstrating a wrist lock to a fascinated group of younger delegates. Head instructor at the Imperial Combat Academy, advocating for peaceful conflict resolution through controlled training. While wearing a coral belt, Jessica noted with a slight smile. I still can't believe his instructors in Brazil promoted him that quickly. Well, he did master the techniques fast enough to subdue a Drachnid high commander using pure skill. True, though sometimes I wonder. If he let you win that first match, Martinez finished. Does it matter? Look at the results. Jessica watched as Cathax transitioned smoothly into a discussion of leverage principles with a group that now included several traditionally hostile species, all nodding in appreciation of the technical details. No, she decided. I suppose it doesn't. Good. Because you have a class to teach tomorrow. The new Joint Special Operations Team wants a refresher on cross-species grappling techniques. Let me guess. Cathax and Vexthor will be guest instructors? Along with representatives from 6 other major powers. Apparently, word has spread about the benefits of learning primitive human combat forms. Jessica smiled. Well, we did always say humans had a talent for bringing people together. We just never specified it would be on training mats, Martinez agreed. Now about those facility expansion plans. As they walked away from the window, the stars continued their eternal dance. Somewhere out there, countless beings were learning that sometimes the best way to prevent a war was to learn how to fight properly, and then choose not to. It wasn't exactly traditional diplomacy. But then again, humans had never been very good at doing things the traditional way. That was, after all, what made them so interesting to the rest of the galaxy. The end.